Hello, my name is Justin Cole, Livability Planner with the Nashville Department of Transportation. Thank you for joining us today. We're excited to share progress that we've made on a project to re-envision Gallatin Pike and Main Street in East Nashville. So we had a round of meetings several months ago, and then since then have been working on incorporating that feedback and developing some more detailed concepts into the project. And so we're excited to share with you some of the design concepts that we've developed based on that feedback, and are eager to hear from you all what you think of those concepts. So I'm going to turn it over to Kevin Tilbury with Kimley Horn to um, give us an overview of where we're at.
Thanks, Justin, and I echo my thankfulness that you joined us today. We hope that you are able to learn more about the project and be able to provide feedback. So, thanks again for joining us. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. And so, just wanted to sort of run a few things through with you first. So, the first thing is here we go. So first, we want to give you a little bit of background information. I know some of you may have been involved in previous meetings and some of you may have not. And so what we really want to be able to do is bring everyone up to speed so we're all on the same page. And then, share a little bit about feedback that we've received from you all to date. And then we'd like to show you some ideas that we've taken your feedback and put it into action. And then we're going to get your questions, and then we'll let you know what's coming next. So as we go through the presentation, I'm sure you're going to have questions. And as you do, please put them in the chat. And then once we get through the formal part of the presentation, we'll turn it over to Q&A and we'll start to answer your questions. Okay, so let's dig in a little bit. So first, we want to give you a little bit of background. I'm sure that many of you are on the call today in our meeting because you're concerned about safety on Gallatin Pike and Main Street, and you would be, I think, valid in that concern. I'm sure everyone here in some form or fashion has read or seen about some of the fatal crashes that have happened on Gallatin Pike and Main Street, and the data sort of backs that up, as you can see on the slide here. So it's a frequent injury and crash location. So I guess the question that we want to throw out to you is, of the deaths that you see represented here in the corner, how many of those do you think are acceptable? And of course, the answer to that is none of them are acceptable. So the question then becomes, well, why do we design our streets for pedestrian deaths? And that's the whole point of the Vision Zero movement. So you may have heard of what's called Vision Zero. Nashville has developed a Vision Zero action plan, and essentially what that says is that no fatalities or severe injuries are acceptable, and that we're going to design our transportation system so that it eliminates those and provides safe and healthy transportation options for everyone. So what is it about safety and corridors? So one of the things that we do know is that there's a direct relationship between vehicle speed and safety, and this little chart shows you what we mean by that. So at certain speeds, if you're a pedestrian and you get hit by a car, there's a really good chance that you're not going to survive. And so our ability to provide a safe experience on Gallatin Pike and Main Street depends on our ability to encourage appropriate motor vehicle speeds. So what are some of the problems that we're seeing with that today? Well, one is that the design of the street sort of encourages higher motor vehicle speeds. You've got this big, wide, expansive pavement that you can see here on Main Street, and that's because there's a lot of undefined pavement space right now. So that creates this big, long, straight stretch of roadway that encourages motor vehicles to go faster. It's only natural. So that's one dimension of it. The other is the fact that there really aren't a lot of safe opportunities across the street in certain locations on the corridor. You can see several are here that we're calling on the map. One you see there is a quarter of a mile, and a couple of them are a half a mile of any safe crossing location. Of course, no one's going to walk half a mile across the street. They're probably going to try and cross somewhere in the middle. And what we've seen with the crash data is that a lot of the fatalities and injuries are at those locations where there is no safe crossing. And really, just generally, even if there is a sidewalk, just walking on the street right now, it's not very comfortable. It's not a place that you would want to be. There's not really a buffer from the traffic that's speeding by. There's no kind of street furnishing zone with landscaping and street furniture and things like that. So it's not the best experience. And this is an example. Our team went out and walked along Main Street last year and took some video. And this is what our experience was like. We could barely hear ourselves talk to each other because we were much on the roadway. So it's not a good place right now if you want to get out and get a cup of coffee, walk to school, or walk to work, or any of those things. Now, we do know that it is a popular corridor for all types of travel. It's the second highest ridership route in the WeGo system. And there is great service on Gallatin Pike, but we could do better. A lot of the issues right now on Gallatin Pike result in vehicle delay on buses, which impacts the user experience, and it also adds to the operating costs. As you can see, they're almost $750,000 a year in operating costs just by the fact that the bus gets stopped in traffic. We've also looked at the trip data in the corridor, and what we're seeing is that a lot of the trips are, less than a mile, less than 2 miles in length, and these are trips that could be done by walking and biking instead of, a lot of those are probably being taken via car today because it's not as we said, a great experience to walk or bike in the corridor today. So we definitely have potential to create walk and bike trips. And it's not just a mobility issue. When we provide great places for people to take all forms of transportation, we found the market responds. The economic benefits of multimodal transportation are now well documented, as you can see here on the map. That results in increased investment in corridors, but also in existing businesses seeing increases in foot traffic. No pun intended. So when we talk about the project, what do we mean? So the overall project is to set a long-term vision for Gallatin Pike and Main Street, and that picks up at 5th Street, just on the other side of the East Bank, and then it extends all the way up through Main Street and Gallatin Pike, all the way up to Briley Parkway. This is the segment that is the focus of this project, and our goal is to develop a long-term vision to transform Main Street into what we call a complete street. And what we mean by that, by a complete street, is that it will provide safe and comfortable options for all the modes that we just talked about. So if you want to ride the bus, if you want to walk, if you want to bike, that you have convenient, safe, and comfortable ways of doing that. So that's the goal of this project. Now, we've been underway for the better part of a year now. So we wanted to share a little bit about what we've been up to this point. So I'm sure many of you went to the workshops at the end of last year. We had 2 public workshops in December, and then later in January, we also went out and talked to WeGo riders. We've had an online survey, and we've talked to some business owners as well along Gallatin Pike and Main Street, and we've collected their feedback. So one of the things that we did at the workshop is we asked people, we said, if you could design a Gallatin Pike and Main Street in the future, what would it look like? And this is what people showed us. This is Main Street, and you can see what they said is essentially, they wanted to see bus lanes, they wanted to see facilities for bicycles. So more of that multimodal street, that complete street that we talked about. And this is a little bit further up, just north of 10th on Gallatin Pike, and you can see a very similar design. And then even a little bit further north of the CSX line up to Briley Parkway, you can see something very similar. We also asked you to tell us what your priorities were for Gallatin Pike and Main Street. And we gave you about 13 or 14 options and said, stack them up. Tell us what your most important thing is. What's your next most important thing? These are the results. The different colors represent who told us what. So the purple and orange are feedback at public workshops, and that aqua color are the responses that we got online. And you can see pretty consistently what people told us is that we want more safe and accessible crossing opportunities on the corridor. We want a better pedestrian roadside experience. We want better landscaping. We want better connections to transit, all those types of things. So we have a pretty good sense of what the priorities are. And then more generally, some of the things that we've heard just from talking to residents and business owners and people who visit the corridor, these are some of the things that you've told us that parking and access are important. We want to make sure that we, address traffic, some things that have to do with the aesthetics of the corridor, landscaping, lighting, and again, we heard a lot about pedestrian crossings, all those types of things. So I'm sure you guys have questions. I encourage you to pop them in the chat and we'll get to them in just a minute. But first, what we wanted to share with you are some ideas that we had to respond to what you all told us and what we've observed. So that's what we're going to get to now. What are some things that we proposed for the corridor? So this is what Gallatin Pike. It varies, Gallatin Pike and Main Street, depending on where you are specifically. But generally speaking, this is what it looks like: is that you've got 2 travel lanes in each direction. You've got that what people call a suicide lane or a 2-way center turn lane, and then not a lot of stuff on either side of the road or either edge of the road. So this is one. So we came up with 2 different concepts, we're calling them, for the corridor. So 2 different visions of what Gallatin Pike and Main Street could look like. So here's the first option. We're calling this concept A. And so a couple of things that we want to point out about this design is you'll notice that instead of 2 general travel lanes in each direction, one of those lanes has been focused on use for buses. So in terms of traveling, buses would get the priority in that lane, but cars could make right turns from that lane. So if you wanted to get in and out of the business or make a right turn, you could do it from that lane. But otherwise, it would just be for buses. And then people would get on and off the bus via curbside. That would do a couple of things too, because the buses don't travel as frequently as the cars. It would create a more gentle buffer between the sidewalk and the travel lane, the more general travel lanes. You get a little bit of a buffer there. And it would also obviously provide more of a priority for buses to be able to travel and not get stuck in congestion. And then the other thing too is that we've kept that 2-way center turn lane there, but with a couple of variations. So in addition to be able to make left turns, we've also identified the ability to put in what we're calling raised median islands. And those give you the ability to put in landscaping. They help calm traffic. And then they're also, they can be better and safer locations to cross the street. Here's another example of what that concept would look like. And you can see here that in this case, we're using a median to provide a safe crossing refuge for people that's aligned with the bus stops. You can cross here, take a break, and then cross here. So it's a much easier, safer way to cross the street. And in this specific example, this is on Main Street. We've sort of better defined the on-street parking here. So put in the bus lane and then kind of keep this as on-street parking. The other thing I'll point out too is that we're trying to be as cost effective as possible and as least disruptive as possible. And so by doing that, we're not going to move the curb except for some very specific situations. For the length of the corridor, we're trying to keep the curb intact from one end to the next, so that it's not as costly or as disruptive as a bigger project would be. All right, so that's one concept. And then this is another concept or another idea that we came up with, and we're calling this concept B. So you'll notice that there's a bus lane in this concept, but that we moved it to the center. So instead of operating the curb, it operates in the center. And so that's going to, that'll make the bus move a little more efficiently. But then it also, the other thing that this concept does is that it allows for a dedicated bicycle facility for the whole length of the corridor. So for this concept, you have buses not only operating in the middle, but you have a bikeway or a bike lane from 5th all the way up to Gallatin Pike. It'll look different depending on where you are in the corridor. This is the section that's near near Main Street. I think it's on Gallatin, just south of Ordway. And there's enough room there to put in a protected bikeway. But it'll, a little bit further north, that might be a delineated bike lane instead. It varies. And this is just another version for what that would look like. So in the previous concept, the bus is operated on the curb and people got on and off the bus from the curb. But in this concept, there would be a raised boarding platform in the median island, and people would board from this median island. And so not only would this be a way for people to board the bus, but it would also be sort of that, in that previous concept, we showed you the raised median island, that would be kind of a safe mid-block crossing. This would also achieve that same purpose. The other thing that I'll point out, the difference with this is that you wouldn't be able to make left turns from the corridor, to or from the corridor, except for very specific locations where you would make U-turns to get to different places. And we'll have some more information on that in a minute. Okay, so this is what I just provided you was a very high-level overview of two different ideas for the corridor. And I see that you have some questions. We're going to answer them in just a minute. But I did want to point out that later this week, everything that I showed you and more, we're going to put on the project website. And that's going to give you the ability to explore the concepts in more detail. And so if you registered for this webinar, we'll send out an email with a link to the website where you can explore the concepts in a little more detail. So I showed you some snippets of what each concept would look like. On the website, you can look in detail at every section along the corridor and understand what the corridor would look like under both concept A and concept B. So that'll be on the website. I mentioned that under one of the concepts, B, you wouldn't be able to make direct left turns, but you could make U-turns. So that is explained on the website as well. We talked about the importance of being able to ride a bike and having that choice available. So we'll also, it shows you the differences between the two and how you'd be able to ride a bike in the corridor. Under concept B, you could stay on Gallatin Pike and Main Street and ride a bike for the whole length. Under the first concept, you would have to hop off and ride on a parallel route. So it wouldn't be directly on Gallatin Pike and Main Street for this stretch. That's explained in more detail on the website. And then for really for all the priorities that we talked about, crossing opportunities, roadside experience, transit priority, there's an FAQ that describes the differences between each concept for each of those priorities, and that'll be up there as well. So you'll be able to explore more detail, and then we also want you to be able to give us feedback and respond. So there's a survey up there where we're going to ask you to tell us what you like and what you don't like about each of those concepts, and then also what are the elements that are really important to you and what are the elements that may not be as important to you. So you'll be able to provide feedback via the online survey as well. Okay, well, I think I've done enough talking at this point, so I'm going to stop. And first, I'll see if Justin, if you had anything to add. And if not, I think we've got some questions in the queue, and I'll turn it over to Veronica, and we can start to address your questions.
Awesome. Yes, we have gotten several questions, and the first is a question about the context of the project. Someone said they don't recall the project having included Gallatin Pike from South 10th Street to Briley Parkway. Has the scope of the project changed? If so, how has the input changed?
Justin, do you want to answer that, or would you like for me to?
There we go. Okay. Yeah, so happy to answer that. The project has always been establishing that vision for the complete corridor up to Briley. The genesis to the project was, however, that we knew that Metro Water was going to be starting work to replace a water line on the Main Street section. And so that actually is going from 5th up to Eastland. And so given that that is a segment of roadway that is on our high injury network, we knew we wanted to take advantage of that opportunity, that the road is going to be repaved next year. And so that is sort of what prompted this project. And then, of course, we wanted to consider the broader corridor as a whole to see how what we do on Main Street can fit in with the rest of the corridor. So that's the scope of this project.
Awesome. The next question is, any idea of the increased congestion caused by reducing Main Street traffic flow down to one lane?
So this is something that Kimley Horn has been looking at. And Kevin, do you want to give an overview of kind of what we're seeing?
Yeah, that's a great question, and I would have the same exact question. So what we found is we've looked at congestion in the quarter today, and the way that you do that is as you're aware, congestion really happens at the intersection. So most of the time, the reason you can't get from point A to point B is you're stuck at a traffic light. So we've looked at all the major intersections along the quarter. We understand how it operates today, and we understand how it's going to operate in the future. And so what we found is that if we build in the multimodal improvements, if about 10 to 20% of the trips right now that are on Gallatin Pike and Main Street, they shift from driving to walking, biking, or riding transit. If about 10 to 20% of those shift, and then on top of that, if another 10 to 20%, and we've also looked at trip behavior on the quarter, and what we've been able to surmise is about 10 to 20% of the trips that are taking Gallatin Pike and Main Street today would probably shift over to Ellington Parkway instead to make their trip. So if those two things happen, the 10 to 20% of trips shift to walking, biking, and transit, and then another 10 to 20 shift to Ellington Parkway. What we found is that the delay at the intersections will be virtually the same as it would be if we did nothing on Gallatin Pike Street. So now we can say that yes, that it will not significantly degrade congestion if those two things happen. Now, as the project moves further into planning and design, we'll continue to look at that in more detail. But at this level of analysis, we can say with a pretty safe level of confidence that it won't significantly impact.
Good question. The next question is, how would bus-only lanes be enforced?
So I can start on that. Enforcement is always a challenge. I will say, there's some variation in the two concepts, in that the curbside bus lanes can be a little bit harder to enforce in that they are used for right turns as well, and so drivers can use that lane if they're making a right turn. Center lanes, that's a little bit less of an issue because you're restricting the turns across the bus lane. But yeah, it would be something that we would need to enforce. And there's new technologies out there that we could be exploring in terms of automated enforcement as well. So.
Yep, you answered it. So generally speaking, Justin's right. The inside running lane would be easier to enforce. People generally respect those more than the outside lanes, especially because it will be mixed. Could make right turn lanes. And people are, there's always going to be people that are going to skirt the rules and cheat. But generally speaking, what we've seen in other communities is that people generally follow the rules and will not travel in that lane. And if you specifically mark it, they'll know to stay out of the lane. So, but yes, it will be something that will be enforced. Sure.
Great. The next question has to do with accessibility, concerns and questions about how will wheelchairs or seniors get to the center island.
You want me to take that, Justin? So that's a great question. So the design is what we call ADA compliant, which means that there are guidelines for designing facilities so that they are accessible by wheelchair and people with limited abilities. And so I assume that you're talking specifically about the center boarding platform. And so it would be ADA accessible. So people in a marked and signed crosswalk, they would enter the platform, and it would be designed so that people could access it via a wheelchair. So it would have the grade, the width, all of the elements necessary for someone in a wheelchair to be able to get to it. And because it's level, so they would board level, it would actually be easier for them to board a bus than it probably would be with the curb.
And I'll just add, this is not exactly the same thing, but we have a similar design for boarding islands on 12th and on Nolensville, where there's a protected bike lane, and so there's not a general traffic lane between the curb and the boarding island for transit, but there is a bike lane, and so it's the same thing. There's the ADA accessible ramps that where you cross and use that to access the transit boarding island. So.
Great. The next question are, what are the design constraints or constraints for construction that are in place for the work? For example, could eminent domain be used to acquire property on which to extend sidewalks?
So we're, like Kevin said earlier, we're trying to, for the most part, stay within existing curb line. So we don't anticipate this involving any, significant widening. Depending on the concept that we choose and depending on, the specifics of design, once we kind of get into that, there could be certain intersections where we, need to do some widening and acquire right of way. And, we have a process of going through that we use when we're, doing new sidewalks or all those sorts of things. And so, but we don't anticipate widening to be a major aspect of this.
Perfect. Next, with concept B, could we add more trees near the sidewalk / for stormwater?
You want me to jump in and take that?
Yeah. So if I'm remembering correctly, when we fit the bike lanes in, there is for some segments the opportunity for that bioswale protection of the bike lane, and we may be able to do trees in that, and that's something that we'll need to explore more fully as we get into design. Yeah, and then that's kind of one of the trade-offs. There's only so much we can fit within the width. So if we go with an option that has like the center median, we can definitely incorporate more space that we could potentially plant trees. And so that's kind of one of the things that we need to get feedback on.
Yep. And so when you're able to go online and look at the differences between the two concepts, the locations where it's possible to put in the bioswales will be called out so that you can sort of see the differences between the two options, and make your own, develop your own feedback that way. But you'll be able to see, we did call out locations where that would be possible. You'll be able to see that when you look at the two options, two concepts.
And while we're on it, also a question for concept B, would bike lanes be elevated or protected by a curb or another barrier, or would these be flexible posts?
It would vary based on the segment. So there's segments of road where it's a little bit wider and there's more space to be able to provide, more substantial protection. But there's also segments where we're a little bit more constrained, and so there might only be kind of a narrow delineator or painted, barrier. So, and that's something again. As we get more into detailed design, we can, start to nail down the details of that. But that's all also again on those concepts that Kevin mentioned that we'll post on the website. You'll be able to kind of look at individual segments and see this segment will have space for protection, and this segment won't. I'll also add that also on some of those concepts, on concept B, where there's a station or a left turn lane, we have shown the bike lane going kind of behind the curb at sidewalk level, and that's the place where in order to accommodate all of that, in some places we would need a little bit of widening in order to fit things, but yeah, so that's an aspect of concept B.
And I'll bring up so we can kind of illustrate some of the things that Justin's talking about if it would be helpful. So here's the bringing the bike lane behind the curb that he's talking about, and the bios, the ability to put in a bioswale here. So I'll have this up so we can talk a little bit more about that to answer your questions. If that would be helpful.
Thanks, Kevin. The next one is more of a comment, but also a concern that not restricting left turns in certain places and having to make U-turns on a busy road was one of the greatest objections to Carl Dean's AMP. So just a comment.
Yeah, so this is one of the key trade-offs. And, one of the things that we're looking at, Kevin mentioned sort of some of the benefits to, the center bus lanes in terms of transit speed. There's also some safety benefits. So we're looking at, the number of collisions that occur on the corridor that, that occur because of the multiple conflict points of people being able to make left turns in a lot of different places from different directions. So, that's something to consider. But again, like you're saying, that it does produce a situation where folks are going to have to maybe go a little bit farther out of their way to get to their destination in order to make a left on the corridor. They might have to, first make a right and then go to the next signalized intersection and make a U-turn. So that it's going to for sure add some time for people driving to access destinations on the corridor.
And I'll add that's exactly why we have two different concepts, is so that you can see what some of the trade-offs are. So in this case, it would be a little less convenient to make left turns, but the trade-off is that it would be the corridor would be a little safer overall. So all throughout there are little trade-offs to be made in comparing the two concepts. And what we're interested in is getting feedback like what you just gave us. So we'll know, what the preference is for each concept.
Okay, next, does Ellington Parkway have the capacity to handle increased traffic flow at all times considered for traffic diversion from Gallatin Pike?
You want me to take that, Justin?
Yeah.
So, I mentioned that we made assumptions about diversion. So the number of trips that would divert from Gallatin Pike to Ellington Parkway, and the way that we've made that assumption is by looking at where trips are coming from and where they're going. And we found that it would be easier for people to shift over to Ellington Parkway. And we're able to quantify that, and we think that it will result in about a 7 to 10% increase in traffic on Ellington Parkway, depending specifically on Ellington Parkway. So it's not going to be a significant increase. The areas where you've got congestion on Ellington Parkway will continue to be congested. They won't get significantly worse, but they will obviously still be congested. We also looked at interchanges. So we looked at people that would not just get on Ellington Parkway, but where they would get on, so the specific interchange on and off ramps. And again, what we found is that there are certain locations like Douglas, for example, where there is congestion right now at that interchange. And when people divert from Main Street or Gallatin Pike over to Ellington Parkway on Douglas, they're going to contribute a little bit more to that congestion, but it's not going to make it significantly worse. So the things that are congested will continue to be congested, but it's not going to make any of the other interchanges significantly worse.
And while not, directly a part of this project, we're using that information to help understand where, depending on which concept we end up going with, and as we, get further into design and construction, if there's other improvements that can be made at those intersections to facilitate improved traffic flow. Yeah.
Great. We are getting a lot of questions about crosswalks and how those will be safer, especially by slowing down traffic. Can they be raised? How do you expect people in wheelchairs to get across the street in the right amount of time? Everything crosswalks.
So I'll let Kevin chime in here, but I will highlight that the general design, approach that we're taking is to try to reduce speeds on Gallatin Pike, and both of these concepts, will help to do that by, narrowing the roadway, some visually narrowing, incorporating medians, bioswale buffers, all these sorts of things that we know can help contribute to, lowering the speed that occurs on the corridor. And then, of course, we also identified that there's, gaps and crosswalks and inadequate crossing facilities. So, that's another aspect of this, is making sure that, as we, improve these intersections and add these other elements, we're creating an improved crossing facility, so that, those treatments combined with an overall reduced speed make it much more comfortable to cross the street on the corridor.
Yeah, so what I've got the image on the screen. This is what Gallatin Pike looks like right now. And so if you're crossing the street, you've essentially got to cross 5 lanes of traffic without any sort of marking. And the cars are, and they're pretty high speed. So you just got to go. You can try stopping in the two-way center turn lane, but it's not, cars can operate there too. So it's not a safe spot. So you've got, 50 to 60 feet of pavement that you've got to cross in one single stretch. So here's one way that we can make it easier to cross the street. Let me skip ahead and show you an example where we've got, so here's a raised median. And so where previously you had to sort of dart across all that pavement in one, fell swoop, this is what's called a 2-stage crossing. And so you've got to make one crossing here. And so you're only crossing about 20 feet of pavement here, and then you enter the median, and then you make another crossing. You can wait here in the median safely and then make another crossing, another 20 feet or so. So instead of one 60-foot crossing, now you're only making 2 shorter 20-foot crossings. So it's going to be significantly safer to cross. This design is, again, I'll use the word ADA compliant, the Americans with Disabilities Act. So it's designed to be consistent with that, which is 4 feet. So there's sufficient width here for wheelchairs to get through this as well. So if I'm in a wheelchair, it's going to be significantly safer for me to cross, and it's signed and marked. There would be flashing lights to cross here, wait, and then cross again, as opposed to what it's like today. Is if I'm in a wheelchair, I've got to figure out how to get across all these lanes of traffic on my own. So much safer design that way. The other way is that we've intentionally placed elements in the design that are going to create what we call horizontal deflection. And horizontal deflection is just simply a shift in traffic. So you can see this little shift in the lane, and it's happening on both sides, here in the center and on the side. And that is a very subtle way of making cars operate a little bit more slowly. So whereas before you've got this long, straight sort of runway to zoom down, now you've got a little bit more of a narrow way to get through, and there's a little bit of shift there. So you're going to have to slow down naturally to make it through. Not so slow that it's going to annoy you like a stop sign would, but more of a subtle slowing down, so you'll move at an appropriate speed. The magic number that we're shooting for is 30 miles an hour. Below 30 miles an hour, the chance of a pedestrian fatality goes down significantly. And so that's what we're shooting for, and that's what we're trying to design the road to do. Not to completely stop traffic, but that it would move at an appropriate rate of speed so that it creates safe outcomes. So I hope I answered the question, but we can go into it in more detail for sure.
No, that's awesome. Thank you. Okay, a question about any possibility for better parking options close to transit stops, sort of like a park and ride situation.
So aside from the potential, street parking being an element of some of the concepts, this project isn't looking at, like a dedicated park and ride facility. We are working closely with WeGo on this project, and I know that they have, plans for, new and improved park and rides. And I believe have some along the corridor now up in the Madison area. But as part of this project, we're not directly looking at establishing, new park and rides. But I think it's a relevant, point for coordination to provide, another way for people to access the transit on the corridor.
Yeah, and I'll add, you're not the first person to bring that up. I think it's a great idea, and Vigo has been a partner, as Justin said, and so they're in the room and listening, and so that's definitely a concept that we'll report on to them. And then also, I don't know how closely you all are following the East Bank, but one of the signature projects on the East Bank is a multimodal hub. And so the idea is that not only would the convergence of WeGo routes happen there, but that there would be nearby parking so that you could park and then you could hop on a bus and really get to anywhere that you wanted to, or you could ride your bike and park there too and hop on a bus. So there is that option that's probably a little more advanced in the stages of planning, is that multimodal hub. And then we'll continue to look at, yes, ideas for park and ride further along the corridor.
We have someone pointing out that one of the hardest parts of walking or biking along Gallatin, specifically between 10th and Hart, are all of the commercial driveways. And so is access management a part of this project? How are we addressing that issue?
So in terms of the driveway locations, one of the challenges there, we definitely know that that's an issue for, cycling, for pedestrians as well, that there are frequent driveways along the corridors. Of course, for some of the businesses along the corridors, that might be their only access. And so we definitely have to balance that. And so there could be opportunities as we get into design to consolidate some driveways and do some things there. Obviously the form of access management of having a median or, restricting the left turns would help in terms of, again, reducing the number of kind of potential conflicts that could occur. But and of course, long term, as redevelopment occurs, we are, making sure that we're limiting the number of driveways and shifting driveways to side streets wherever possible. And so there's ways to achieve that longer term, but it's not something that we can necessarily fully address in the short term. So there will still be segments where there are, frequent driveways in the short term.
Yeah, and that's absolutely a challenge. It's kind of as Justin said, a balancing act, because in some cases that's the only way the businesses have for parking to get in and out. So one of the things that you'll find on the website is a side-by-side comparison of bike facilities under each concept. So under concept B, you can see a map of what the bike facility would look like on Gallatin Pike and Main Street for the whole stretch, whether it's a delineated bike lane or a marked bike lane or a protected bikeway. And then concept A, as a comparison, says, okay, what if we were to develop a parallel route that would run just off of Gallatin Pike? So instead of being directly on Gallatin Pike, it would sort of make use of some of these side roads, which is a little more circuitous, of course. So we'd love to get your feedback on what you think about each of these ideas. Would you rather stay on Gallatin Pike and bike the whole way down, or would you rather explore looking at a parallel off-street route? So we'd love to get feedback on that, and you can explore both of these ideas a little bit further on the website.
Perfect. Okay, the next question is about the automatic enforcement that Justin brought up earlier. It sounds like traffic cameras. Will a mayor who opposes LPR support them? Places like Murfreesboro have pulled theirs. Could they one day be expanded to enforce speed limits or become surveillance cameras?
So I'll say that, in terms of like traffic enforcement and surveillance, those are like kind of two separate things. And so anything that we would be exploring, in the future would be related to, enforcement. It's something that's, come up with curbside management issues as well. The idea of having, with our Connect Downtown project, we're looking at, really doing a better job of managing what happens on the curb. So where there's loading, where there is parking, and to restrict folks improperly stopping their vehicle on a curb when they shouldn't be doing that. And so there's a number of technologies out there. Again, yes, there are barriers that we would have to overcome and decisions that would have to be made on the nature of that. But it's definitely something that a lot of peer cities are doing to help make sure that curbside is being used in the proper way. So.
Great. Okay, the next question is it possible for the bus-only lanes to be separated by a physical curb?
So certainly that's an option for the center running. There could be that with the curbside that could potentially be there, but it would be the same sort of situation with the bike lanes as if anywhere there's a driveway, there couldn't be a separation there. Yeah, Kevin, I don't know if you have anything else to add
You
there.
called it. So the image that I'm showing here on the screen, you can see that there's a where the pavement width will allow it, there is a raised median separating the bus lanes in the middle. So yes, that's possible. But as Justin said, yeah, the curb, because of the need to provide access, there would not be a physical separation, a physical barrier.
Great, thanks. Okay, is implementation dependent or will it be affected by the transit referendum decision? Since this was identified as a BRT route and those concepts, what happens if the referendum doesn't pass?
Yeah, so we of course, started working on this project before any conversations about a referendum for November had been occurring. So, um, you know, this is a vision project for the corridor, so construction of the entire corridor is not funded. So, whatever happens in November, that could provide an avenue towards funding part of this. Right now our focus is on kind of establishing that vision for the corridor. That could then, go into informing how, future design and construction of a transit project on the corridor could look. So,
Perfect. Okay, we're circling back to the Ellington question. They did not feel like we got an answer on the capacity of Ellington. Do we have data showing what capacity is like for Ellington?
Kevin, can you
Yeah.
describe
So
what we've? Yeah.
so we've looked at the capacity at the interchanges, and then we've looked at the mainline capacity. And so we've noted areas where there is congestion on the corridor. And so there's definitely there is currently and there will be congestion at certain interchanges and certain segments on Ellington Parkway. And at this level of analysis, what it's shown is that the shift is small enough that it's not going to significantly change the areas of congestion on Ellington Parkway one way or the other. So we're not going to, tell you that there's no congestion and delay on Ellington Parkway because there is at certain times a day. But what we can say is at this level of analysis, we look at the existing and future traffic on Ellington Parkway and then the amount that we think it will shift. And it's about 7%, and it's not going to significantly increase the level of congestion that is currently and is projected to be experienced. I hope that directly answered the question, but if not, we can circle back.
Yeah, if it did not answer the question, feel free to put another note in the chat. Will power lines be buried in the process to make the street look better and be safer in storms?
So we are not with this project currently looking at, underground utilities. That, again, that could be an aspect that's explored in the future. It's an expensive proposition, I will say that. So again, we're kind of trying to, take a little bit of a lighter touch in terms of, level of impact. But
A couple of comments about the bike lanes. Can you add a concept with the bike lanes in the median to help avoid the driveway issue? And then just some notes that the parallel routes don't seem exactly parallel. And there's no dedicated bicycle facilities on neighborhood streets. So would those be included in the project if concept A moves forward?
and then maybe Anna wants to answer a little bit about that, if you can unmute her.
Thank you. Oh, that was quite the gate there on the mute. Thank you. So yes, the bikeway, the alternative parallel bikeway, would be improved with intersection improvements, traffic calming, so that it was a high quality, low stress bikeway adjacent to Gallatin. And one thing that I've been pointing out to folks is the parallel bikeway can move separately from whatever happens on Gallatin. So it can either be an additional bikeway or it can be a separate bikeway. It's not necessarily tied to this project, but it could be implemented with this project. We're trying to track that mobility need along with this project.
Thanks, Anna. Do you want to hit on spokes too?
Yes. So the Spokes project on Woodlands, South 10th Street and South 5th Street provides a mini network closer in, further south and west in East Nashville, and provides that connection to downtown, and would be parallel to a Gallatin transitway or bikeway. I want to touch quickly on the question of this cycle truck as well. We have not looked at a concept for like a center running bikeway. We have looked at, and you all probably realize, we've looked at a few concepts for like a shared bus bike lane or a shared bike driving lane. And so I think the question would be, how safe, calm, comfortable, low speed is Gallatin itself in order to make a concept like that work, knowing that there would need to be transitions at signals and things like that.
Yeah, and I'll just
Awesome.
add on the center concept. It's not something we've explored. It's something we can look at. You're right. It reduces the conflicts with the driveways. Trade-off is that reduces the ease at which a cyclist can access the destination along the corridor. So again, it can be a little bit more difficult to get to and from your destination that way. But it's something we can definitely take a look at.
Hey, we'll be
And I
happy
think
to answer
Anna,
more questions, but I did want to make sure because we're almost at time before people start dropping off. I did want to let you know that there is we had a public workshop yesterday, and we're having another one tonight. So in addition to this meeting, you can see the concepts in a little more detail at the public workshop. And that's going to be at the Lytton Alumni Center, which is on the same campus as the middle school on the north end of the corridor. And it's going to be from 6:30 to 8. It's open house style, so you can drop by at any point between 6:30 and 8 tonight. And then later this week, we will make all the materials that we have at the public workshop. We'll make those available online. And we'll also have a survey online. So you can come and see the detail at the workshop, provide feedback at the workshop, or you can participate later, look at the materials online and do a survey online. And then last, just to let you know where we're going from here, we're going to take a little bit of time and understand and process the feedback that you're giving us and start to develop some recommendations into next month. And we hope to have another round of outreach at some point later in the spring to let you know what the recommendations of this plan are. And then we'll start to firm those up further into May and into the summer. So that's kind of where we're going from here. So we'll go back and answer a few more questions, but I did want to make sure that you guys were aware of that. So for those of you that do have to drop off, thank you for your time, and we hope that that you'll go back and participate online or at the workshop tonight.
Thanks, Kevin. And at the end, I can paste the survey link and website link in the chat before you leave.
Great.
Okay, back to Ellington Parkway. How have those projections taken into account the future Oracle development and maybe an increase in people traveling via Ellington Parkway to River North?
Yeah, that's a great question. So And there's been a lot of traffic analysis that's been done on the East Bank. And so we've been able to take some of that into account. A lot of the full growth projections are still sort of coming into focus. So for example, the full impacts of not just Oracle, but a lot of the other things on the East Bank and all throughout. So as this plan continues to be developed and refined, and sort of as they go into the design phase, we'll be able to take more of that into account. So to answer your question, to the extent that the data is available right now, yes, it has been taken into account. But we know that it's sort of an evolving situation and a moving target. So we're going to continue to look at that situation as it evolves, not just for Oracle, but for the other developments in the East Bank and beyond.
And I'll also just add that, we're coordinating with what's happening on the East Bank in multiple ways, and that we know that there's, transit improvements, coming with the East Bank. There's, bicycle facilities, coming with East Bank. And so as we are working on this project, we're, considering, carefully how, this corridor connects, for all modes, with the future development of a street network on the East Bank. So
Great. Okay, I think we might have time for one more question. Is this project expected to offset the rise in operating costs, for example, keeping bike lanes swept and cleaning bus stops?
So one way I can answer that is that, we in working with WeGo, they've noted, the degree to which kind of variability in travel time increases their operating costs on the corridor. And so certainly adding bus lanes that improves the reliability of the transit on the corridor is going to reduce their operating costs in terms of the number of vehicles it takes to provide that 10-minute service is going to go down. In terms of the kind of maintenance of the infrastructure, that's something, as we continue to build out more multimodal infrastructure, maintenance, is an aspect of that, of us, maintaining that, whether that's, bike lanes or any other, feature of the roadway. So.
All right, and that is our time. The survey link has been put in the chat and the project website link. So be sure to check the project website later this week for all of the meeting materials that we went over today. And hopefully we see you tonight and spread the word. Thank you.
Thank
Thank
you.
you all.